you all have written deeply political work. What is the impulse to do it, and how do you hope for it to work out into the world once it's no longer yours and it goes out into the world?
You know, I think when I'm working, I'm not thinking I'm making political work. I think I'm making something that is very close to what I'm seeing. And
that's different, that's distinct?
It is distinct because I think that the idea that you can separate politics out from life is the first fiction. All of what we do includes all of what happens. And so when one is working inside the life that one is living. And I think, in a sense, Tony, you're right, that you are responsible for what has happened. Because I think that artists of color, and I hate to do this, but artists of color and have been in a state of emergency around what was happening to, dead bodies were in the street. And then I see the Women's March, and so clearly it's possible for white women to come out for something. Where were they all those times? Where were all of you at the Black Lives Matter marches? Why did it take this to suddenly politicize you when these things have been going on for years and years and years?
Are you suggesting that are you suggesting that there were no white people at all at Black Lives Matter demonstrations?
I'm not saying no. I'm not talking about individuals.
Right.
I'm talking about the collective.
In its mass.
In its mass. Because I think this is the problem. White people always think about themselves as individuals. I'm talking about, where was white America when these human rights issues were happening? Where were you?
Yeah, well, I've been in various places in the world arguing with various kinds of power, over the course of the last long time. But I agree, when I've been writing, whether I was writing about India or Pakistan or radical Islam or whatever, my feeling was that I was writing a creative act which came out of my fullest response to being where I was in my life and in the world, And if that ends up being political, then it ends up being political. But it wasn't polemical. It was a way of trying to embrace as much as I could understand of the place that I was. And I think that's what we're all saying in our different ways. I don't think we're in a fascist state yet. I don't think there's any I don't think we've raised the possibility of there not being another election, which is one of the consequences of fascism. You elect somebody who then cancels the process that brought him to power. I don't think we're close to that. But it is interesting. If you look at, the question you asked is what should we all do in this situation, is to look at what has happened before in worse situations. That the art of the Soviet Union, the literature of the Soviet Union was of a very high order, and some of that was directly political. Some of that was Solzhenitsyn and the Gulag Archipelago, and so on. But much of it was fiction, much of it of an absurdist, surreal kind, much of it funny. I remember soon after the end of communism being in the office of the then mayor of Budapest, Gabor Demszky, who had been a famous samizdat publisher. And he had, his pride of joy was this cabinet in his mayoral office of the books they had published under the counter during the communist era. Many of these books were comedies. Many of them there was a lot of humor there, is what I'm saying. And the one thing that he said, which I've always remembered, is he said, any writer knows that the worse it is, the better it is. when you're living in bad times, you've got a subject.
Right.
The literature of the Soviet Union is far superior to the literature of the post-Soviet Union.
I'm afraid that's so.
So if we have to find a way of reacting to dreadfulness, I have no doubt that we will find that way.
Now, in the Soviet Union, that work was not available. You couldn't read it. It was in Samizdat and Tamizdat, and it was underground. And unless you were really pretty connected in an urban center, it was invisible from your life. It was being read mainly by people on the periphery of the Soviet Union. How will it work here? In other words, let's assume that you can still buy your books and hear your radio broadcasts and go to theater. What do you want that political work to do, or is that just something that an artist doesn't think about?
We do now live in a world in which it's impossible to ban a text, because you can put it out there. You know, there's a million ways of putting a text out there if you want it to be out there. Electronically, on the internet, you know, etc. You can't ban a book anymore. So in that sense, we have it better than those artists in the Soviet period who could be almost silenced.